Hi, I'm Jeremy, and you're listening to Verse by Verse. Fasting is one of the Bible's more mysterious practices. It's clear that it's something important. Even Jesus fasted before his confrontation with Satan in the wilderness. And it's clear that it involves not eating for a period of time, but it's not immediately clear how a fast is supposed to work. Why do we fast? What does it accomplish? What's the value of a fast? That's more than we can tackle in today's episode, but today we're going to look at a passage that starts to answer some of those questions. God sent the prophet Isaiah to deliver a harsh rebuke against ancient Israel, and in that rebuke, we find a hint of what God expects fasting to look like. I'm going to read this out of the Net Bible because it translates the passage into something that's easier to follow. Isaiah 58, starting in verse 3. They lament, "Why don't you notice when we fast?" That is, speaking to God. "Why don't you pay attention when we humble ourselves? Look, at the same time you fast, you satisfy your selfish desires. You oppress your workers. Look, your fasting is accompanied by arguments, brawls, and fistfights. Do not fast as you do today, trying to make your voice heard in heaven. Is this really the kind of fasting I want? Do I want a day when people merely humble themselves, bowing their heads like a reed and stretching out on sackcloth and ashes? Is this really what you call a fast, a day that is pleasing to the Lord?" This idea of humbling ourselves. In Hebrew, it literally means afflicting our souls. It's an idiom for fasting, going without food and water. That's hard on a human body, and it's an important part of fasting, but it's not the only part. The ancient Israelites were using their fasting as an opportunity to put on a show. They were making a big deal out of how righteous they looked, humbled, afflicted, miserable, spread out on sackcloth and ashes. It was all a performance. And while they were performing, they were satisfying their selfish desires, oppressing their workers, starting arguments. The English Standard Version says in verse 4, "Fasting like yours this day will not make your voice to be heard on high." God's not interested in a performance. He isn't looking for us to put on a convincing show. He wants to see something deeper than that. Our passage for today starts in verse 6, where God says, "No, this is the kind of fast I want. I want you to remove the sinful chains, to tear away the ropes of the burdensome yoke, to set free the oppressed, and to break every burdensome yoke. I want you to share your food with the hungry and to provide shelter for homeless, oppressed people. When you see someone naked, clothe them. Don't turn your back on your own flesh and blood." In our own fasts, we should look for the opportunity to unburden others. Isaiah was speaking to landowners with their own workers and servants, so our opportunities for good will look a little different. But the key is that God isn't looking for our fasts to be a miserable display, showing off our righteousness through agony. He wants us to break the chains of sin in our lives and to show kindness to each other. Verse 9 of the same chapter says, "Then you will call out, and the Lord will respond. You will cry out, and he will reply, 'Here I am.'" Fasting is important. It's a valuable tool God gives us in our relationship with him. But it'll become a useless tool if we don't learn to use it the way it's meant to be used. We have to start by seeking to understand the kind of fast God wants. We have a free book you can download or listen to, 5 Tools for Spiritual Growth. One whole section of that book is devoted to understanding what fasting is and how God expects us to make use of it. You can find the links in the show notes.
Verse by Verse is a companion podcast to the Daily Bible Verse blog, which you can find on the Life, Hope, and Truth Learning Center. Check out the show notes for more.